we were out filming some stormwater videos with the city of Milwaukee for Earth Day yesterday, and the Osprey are back, and they are all shacked up, and they are loud. And they're just flying back and forth with sticks all the time. So,
well, turkey vultures are back too.
Yep, turkey vultures are back. I was telling Mark Fitzsimons, one of our board members, who's this really serious birder, that I saw a black-throated gray warbler 2 weekends ago.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, it's spring and I love it. So Heather, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. So we're gonna go ahead and start introductions, and folks will join us as they chime in. So I'm Neil Schulman. I'm the executive director of the North Clackamas Watersheds Council. Thank you for joining us. Again, it is an evening where there's a lot of temptations out there, and I'm glad you chose to join this. And we will not take up your whole evening, but we'll cover some really good and fun and important stuff. This show is put on by Alexis Barton. She works with us as our communications and outreach coordinator. She also wears about 16 different hats with different watershed councils, different civic groups. I'll let her introduce all of that and herself, and then I'll want to hear from you. So, Alexis.
Awesome, thanks, Neil. Yeah, hey everyone, my name is Alexis. As Neil indicated, I'm the outreach and education person on board with North Clackamas here, and I am also really glad that you're here. It might even still be light out when we're done, so that's I think we'll still get some sunlight before and after. Yeah, I work for North Clackamas Watersheds Council. I'm also the coordinator for the Tryon Creek Watershed Council, and I live in the North Clackamas Watersheds, which is extra special for me. And I'm tapped in to a bunch of the community work as the chair of the Friends of Elk Rock Island, and I also sit on the City of Milwaukee's tree board. So I can speak to a couple of those different processes throughout the night too, but let's hear who you are first. Back to you, Neil.
Great, thanks. So I'm just going to kind of go around in the order of my screen, and it's probably might not be the same as the order of yours, but I just really want to know your name and what watershed you live in. And if you don't know what watershed you live in, where you live, and then we'll figure it out. And what is the one thing you want to make sure you learn today that hey, made you say, hey, I want to sign up for this, and I'm going to be disappointed if by the time I log off, go do the next thing, if I haven't really kind of learned whatever you want to learn. We'll make sure we can get to that. This is part of a 3-part series too. So there are some things where we might be like, oh, tune in next time for, when we really dig deep into wildlife, or we really dig deep into the roles that trees play in human health, or things like that, but really we want to make sure we get to why you're here. And I am going to start with Lydia.
Thank you. My name is Lydia Henry. I live in Clackamas County, and I think I'm in the Rock Creek Watershed. And this is my first time ever being on one of these calls. So what I want to take home tonight is everything you got to tell me.
Great. And John.
I'm John Nagy. I'm with Clackamas Water Driving Services, but tonight I'm here just on my own. I worked at the City of Milwaukee for 9 years, and then Clackamas County for 22. So I do a lot of work in the Kellogg-Monscott Creek watersheds. And in fact, I started when I was 21 there, and Dick and Sally Shook and Steve Berliner all took me under their wing and kind of helped introduce me to the watershed and really, kind of build my enthusiasm for the possibilities of it. So I wanted to check in tonight, and I used to be on the council, And I want to see how you guys are doing and learn more about what's going on.
Great, thanks, John. And Dick.
I'm Dick Shuck. I'm a board member of the North Clackamas Watersheds Council. I've lived on Mount Scott Creek for 44 some years, and I've seen a lot of changes. And I've kind of joined this because I want to pick up on what other people have seen as far as changes. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. Alexa.
Hi there, my name is Alexa. I'm the Outreach and Communications Specialist over at the Oak Lodge Water Services District. And I also live in the district, and my watershed is Boardman. And tonight I am back because I came to the last class of the series, the last round. So I'm hoping to fill in the blanks on the first and second workshops tonight.
Thanks. For the record, it's more like a workshop than a class. There is no quiz, there's no pop quiz, no that sort of thing.
Good to know.
Neil, you were briefly muted. I don't know if we know who's up next.
Sorry, David, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm David, and I'm property volunteer with Milwaukee Presbyterian Church, and we have 3.5 acres of wetland and rent out room to Neil. And also, I bought the house I'm living in almost 40 years ago from Dick Shook.
That's right.
So he grew up here in this house, and we've loved it, and you know, it's great to see you, Dick.
David, it's great to see you too. You're a sweet guy.
And Dick, do you know our watershed? Would it be Kellogg Creek, or would it be going
Probably,
the other?
I'm not sure whether it be Kellogg. Wouldn't it might be Benthorn.
Yeah, I'm
not real sure.
We'll pull up a map later, and we'll probably help you figure that out. But I didn't know that little bit of trivia. That's funny. Judy.
Yes, I live at Rosevilla, and I'm a member of our green team, and so I get to enjoy looking at the ospreys and the turkey vultures flying up and down the river. This is my first time to do this. I was really involved with the Oregon Environmental Council in the 70s. Then I went away to Indiana for 30 years, and now I'm back and kind of curious to know what's going on.
Lydia, Judy, what does the green team at Rosevilla do?
Well, there's 90 people who are on an email list, and actually for the whole month of April, we are doing Earth Day events with, there's a discussion of the Bill Gates' new book. I'm leading a discussion about how to talk to children about climate change. And on Earth Day, we're doing the Soil Your Undies project. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where you bury a pair of white underwear in 4 to 6 inches of soil, leave it for 6 weeks, and find out whether the microbes have eaten everything but the elastic. So this is our first venture with that. And we're showing several movies like Biggest Little Farm, Farmer's Footprint, and the one that was recently done by with Rachmaninoff's music and someone narrating. I can't remember the name of that. I think it's something about extinction. I can't remember. Anyway, I don't know what district I'm in.
If you're in Rosevilla, it's the Willamette. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
And let's see, Heather.
Hi there. I'm Heather. I am just a neighbor dropping in. I'm actually I'm in between the Rock Creek Sibon watersheds into Clackamas. but our HOA has a couple acres of green space that we are trying to restore and do some water management with. And I've been working with another HOA in Happy Valley, Dale Gunther, and he told me to pop on here and learn as much as I can. Thank you.
Great. And let's see, Sue. There you
Okay, it takes me 5 minutes to get to the right place to unmute myself. Sorry. Hi, my name is Sue With, and I'm another Dick Shook groupie. I have done a little bit of mapping work for Neil, and so I'm interested in that watershed, and I live in the Willamette watershed, just a little north of there. That's it.
Barbara.
Hello, I am Barbara West. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. I live at Willamette View, and so if Roseville is in the Willamette watershed, that's where I am as well. I am in the green team here at Willamette View, and we do very much the same kind of things. And as a matter of fact, we may or may not have, we're trying to have a project with Roseville, wherein we have a pathway, a wildflower pathway to feed the bees, the butterflies, the beetles, all of the invertebrates, the pollinating invertebrates. And I have recently moved back here. I was born in Corvallis, as a matter of fact, but kidnapped by my parents when I was 4. I mean, you know, what parents ever ask if you want to move when you're 4, right? And so I have just moved back here in the last 3 or 4 years and am getting acquainted once again. Thank you.
Great. And let's see, I think we had Sarah Jo join us.
Yeah, I apologize for being late. Traffic was busier than I thought it would be on the way home. My name is Sarah Jo Chaplin, and I have the pleasure of working at Oak Lodge Water Services District, which helps provide sanitary water and stormwater services. And Neil and his folks are some of the partners that we work with in assisting to provide services to our customers. And so when I saw the training, I thought, that sounds like fun. I wanted to see what it was like.
Great, thank you. Thank you. And Gail.
Oh, Gail, you were already unmuted, but you just muted yourself.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I live up above Thiessen. I think I'm in the Boardman Creek area. That's what it looked like. Yeah, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you all.
Great. And what if you have any particular highlights you want to make sure you learn tonight?
No. I want to know where the beaver are.
Sounds great. All right.
And Lori, as soon as you can hear us, we'll just ask you to introduce yourself, and then we'll get started.
Hey guys, I was just wrapping up some chickens with my friend Caitlin from BES, loaning me her electric fence. I'm Lori Bell. I'm a policy analyst at Clackamas Water Environment Services. Thank you for doing this class, guys.
Great. And what would you like to make sure you get out of this evening?
Well, as I am new to water and surface water, I just want to have a better understanding of where are the boundaries of our different watersheds and where do they go? Like I'm like basic 101 watershed.
And that is a perfect segue into the actual content. And some folks may join us if they log in late, and I'll just invite them in, but I'm gonna turn it over to Alexis now to kind of take us away. Again, there's a couple, we'll go over some kind of housekeeping for how to run this on Zoom. My hope is that at some point in the near future, we will actually be able to do this outside, like in a place with birds and the newt that's hanging out behind John and actual, but until that comes, we're gonna have that conversation on Zoom. All right, Alexis.
Awesome. All right. So I'm going to pop us up on screen share. Is that working? Are you guys seeing the full screen presentation? Awesome. I am also in full screen mode, so I couldn't tell for sure. Let me just adjust my chat bar and we will get started. So we first wanted to thank our partners that are helping make this workshop possible. So as you heard during introductions, we have folks here from Oak Lodge Water Services and Water Environment Services. And North Clackamas Watersheds Council also receives funding from the Clackamas Soil and Water Conservation District. So thank you all for being here and being a part of the community. A couple brief little housekeeping things. If you're in it for the beavers, next week's is about wildlife, and we'll really get to look at some adorable video footage. But housekeeping for this conference or this webinar tonight, one of the things is as you know, many of you are on mute, which is perfect, but we are going to have some interactive moments where we'll ask you to take yourself off of mute so we can hear from you. We already did introductions, but if you have any questions throughout the workshop, you can either unmute yourself to ask, or you can pop them in the chat, and Neil is going to be keeping his eye on chat for me. And then we'll also have some time for questions and answers and discussion at the end. And we wanted to thank Steve Berliner for supplying many of the wonderful photos that you'll see in the presentation tonight. This next slide is a little bit meta. What you might notice is the chat bar or the thumbnails of all of our videos might be blocking part of the slide. But if you click on those two little icons, you should be able to toggle around and resize the video thumbnails and actually move it around on the screen if you need to. So we wanted to just show you some of the places in the North Clackamas watersheds to get started. So this here is at Mount Talbot, which is a Metro-owned property. And because we're looking at urban watersheds tonight, really what we're focusing on is how important it is to live well with these natural areas. And having those urban green spaces like Mount Talbot can really help to improve the quality of life, not just for our human, watershed residents, but the wildlife alike. And we also have this photo here of the Rainerson Creek project. So this is some pretty valuable salmon habitat, and this project was restored a few years ago. And there's some projects in the works for some of the other confluences in the North Clackamas watersheds, and we'll speak a little bit to those too. As we mentioned briefly during the introductions, I also work for the Tryon Creek Watershed Council. So Neil is really the expert here on all things North Clackamas specifically. So he might hop in and add more details where I don't have the full information. We're not going to play this video right now, but we will send out links to the couple of videos that we prepared after the fact. This is Tanya from North Clackamas Watersheds Council, and she is standing right along the creek that runs through North Clackamas Park. So even though she's standing right here in this really, great riparian area where you see some, in-stream wood and more complexity to that creek, that's not too far from things like the dog park and the baseball fields. So we hope that we can call out some places tonight where you'll be able to then go and explore some of the wildlife and some of the natural areas that we have in the region. One of the things we also wanted to make sure to convey tonight is that even though we're in an urban area, we do have healthy salmon populations right here. They might be little when they're moving through, but they are still healthy. And so, the Watershed Council works just to make sure that we keep all of that healthy. So that was just sort of a couple photos to show you what's around in the watersheds. Tonight, what we're going to be really focusing on is talking about what our watersheds are and exploring the different things that influence our watershed's health. We're going to be talking about things that we can do individually as well as collectively on a couple different scales. And because these watersheds are right here in an urban area, we're going to also talk about those impacts of urbanization so that we know what we can do to really improve that health. And as we mentioned, this is the first in a 3-part series. So next week, we'll be talking about wildlife in the watershed. And then the week after that, we'll be focusing more about, the people that live in the watershed and how we're really connected from a health perspective. So to steal a line from Charles Dickens, we wanted to kind of talk about a tale of two buildings. Essentially, we know that the population in the North Clackamas watersheds is going up. It's increasing. We have people moving here. We have people seeking, maybe moving outside of the inner urban area for more affordable housing. And as our population grows, we'll be building more buildings. And so we could build buildings that look just like this one here, which is what most of us are familiar with, where we have our parking lots and our roofs, and when it rains, there's a fair amount of water that's just going to run right off of those surfaces. The other kind of building we could build might look more like this. So this kind of building will have things that are components of green infrastructure, where we might have permeable pavements, rain gardens, we might collect some water, we might have an eco roof, and basically we want us to kind of keep in mind what these two different situations might look like, not just for this one building, but for us as residents of the watershed or people that work to make these watersheds healthy. What these two alternatives might yield are going to be pretty different results. So how can we maybe edge towards the one on the right-hand side there? So just to ground us in what watersheds are, a watershed is basically the area of land where all of the water that falls is going to drain to a common place. And so the boundaries of watersheds are often drawn on the ridge tops, right? You can look at a mountain and say one side of that mountain, that water drains to this river, and on one side it drains to the other. In flatter urban areas, it's a little bit harder to tell this super clearly, but our watershed boundaries are just dictating that space where what's happening on the ground, even away from the creek, is going to be affecting what's happening in those water bodies. So you could pretend, say, that this is the Willamette River Basin watershed right here, and one of these little offshoots might be the Clackamas River. So the watersheds, you'll notice there's a sub-watershed called out here. Watersheds also work like the little Russian nesting dolls, where one fits inside of the other, which fits inside of the other, right? And that's because all of the water, wherever water goes, it's going to end up somewhere. So we tend to focus oftentimes on the creek itself, but we're really trying to be mindful altogether here about the entire watershed and all of the different ways that land use and buildings in our watersheds might affect the health of our waters. So this is a map of the Portland area. We know the Willamette River is flowing up and meeting with the Columbia River. The next slide is going to show a map of watershed boundaries. It's clipped to the Willamette Basin. So this is still a watershed over here, but these are the different regional watersheds, and the North Clackamas Watersheds Council works in this area right here. And we'll take a closer look at these maps, but you'll notice we have the Clackamas River to the south, Johnson Creek to the north, and the Willamette River is basically right there on the west-hand side. So here is the North Clackamas watersheds up close. Again, you can see the Willamette Rivers on the west-hand side here, and our watersheds go right about up towards Happy Valley, down towards Gladstone in the west, and again, the east bank of the Willamette. So this whole green area is, what we're going to do next is show you the actual creek systems in our watersheds. So this is where our water is falling and moving and flowing towards the Willamette River. And you'll notice that these creeks, which are given a buffer, right? They're not actually quite as wide as this light purple. It's that dark purple part in the middle. You'll notice that these creeks are segmented. And that is because in urban areas, as we've developed these spaces, we've had to build on top of them and put our creeks through pipes. So once we add in the piped sections, you can start to really get a feel more for that web of our creek systems. One thing that's pretty interesting looking down here at Kellogg Creek, where it puts out into the Willamette River, the city of Milwaukee's mayor, Mark Gamba, found a map from the 1850s that was showing what Kellogg Creek's channel looked like historically, and it had about 3 different entry points into the Willamette River. So urbanization has changed the way that our creeks are able to flow. So right here, like I said, we have Kellogg, and then the Mount Scott watershed is that one that extends up towards Happy Valley and then meets up with Kellogg Creek before flowing through downtown Milwaukee. We also have River Forest Creek, Boardman Creek, and Rainierson Creek, which flow off of the Oatfield Ridge and into the Willamette River.
And if I can chime in real quick, there
Yeah.
is one moderately unusual thing in that Rainierson and Boardman Creek share a headwaters. It's called the Hull Street Wetlands. It's an area that we've been working to restore, but it's basically this big wetland that has where the water drains off of it in 2 directions. And some of it flows into the Boardman Creek system and some of it flows south into the Rainierson Creek.
That's super cool. One of the neat things about working for urban watersheds is all of us have something unique to share about the creeks that are in these areas. That's cool, Neil. Thank you. So yeah, so these arrows just show the direction that water is moving on its way towards the Willamette. Now this map, the bright colors are the watersheds. So here you can more clearly see the distinction between our different watersheds and then the main stem Willamette. The tan areas show our cities. And so you'll notice that in between the cities, there's a lot of unincorporated Clackamas County. So we have a lot of different jurisdictions that are affecting, the management of these watersheds. Before there were cities, as we've sort of mentioned, the whole riparian systems, the whole creekside systems looked a lot different with a lot more wetland space, a lot of floodplains that can hold water for a big amount of time during the year and provide really important habitat. Abundant beaver activity, lots of wood in the streams, and so on and so forth. And these watersheds weren't just passively lived on, they were actively stewarded by the native folks here, primarily the Clackamas, Cowlitz, Kalapuya, and Molalla peoples. And when we're wondering what a healthy creek system or a healthy stream looks like, it's important for us to basically remember that most of the streams that we see nowadays have been modified by humans, especially just in the last couple of 100 years. And so the idea that a stream has sort of one set channel and it always goes that exact same course is not how it has worked historically. I really like this visual because it shows some of the different things that large woody debris, so fallen and decomposing wood, can add to our ecosystems. It's really good hiding places for critters, good hunting perches for birds, and also as our in-stream wood decomposes, it's going to add more nutrients to our water bodies and so on. So again, we'll be discussing a little bit more about the wildlife in the watersheds next week. But basically, the planning that we undergo is going to affect our entire watersheds. What we've done is we've built a lot of stuff. So what we're here to do to talk about is how can we make sure that what we have built is going to not cause a lot of damage to our natural resources. What can we, what do we need to do? What do we need to undo? And how can we just build stuff in a way that really works, for the benefit of our entire watershed? And we have a mix of different uses of land throughout the watershed. We have, some sort of suburban areas. We have a more industrial area, especially looking towards, Southeast 82nd and 99 East, the McLaughlin corridors. And we also have just some more undisturbed areas. The watersheds, the North Clackamas Watersheds area has a lot of people living in it. If all of the people that lived here were a town, our town would be the size of Eugene. So there's a lot of people living here, which means that all of those actions that we take as individuals are going to really be cumulative and add up. So because we've urbanized this whole area, we have a lot of things like pavement, building that's been taking place in floodplains. We've altered the hydrology. We see a lot of, flooding. We've fragmented our habitat. And one of the things that we see in urban areas is that creeks are more warm than they should be. And so dealing with all of this stuff as a nonprofit is sort of why you all are here, right? We can talk about what we can do individually as well as collaboratively. So let's take a look at some of what it might look like in some of our urban creeks. All right, I'm going to credit the 1970s TV reference to Neil here. So this is also the part where we are going to come off mute, and I'm just want to hear from you all. What are some of the things you look good? Again, this is not a test. This is not a class. You're not going to flunk the class, but what are some of the things that you might notice about this particular stretch of creek?
Want the good things or the bad things or just things we notice?
Yes, all of the above.
Well, I noticed that it's not perfectly straight. It has
Ah.
like a little bend, and it's very steep on one side and flat on the other. I'll stop there.
Great.
Those are two things I noticed.
Great. Yeah, so that curve, that bend, that sinuosity is a good feature, right? That can help to create more complexity in habitat. Yeah, what else do you guys see?
You've got a mixture of trees. I mean, it's not all choked up, and not all of the trees. You've got stumps and brushes. I mean, it's just a mixture of vegetation surrounding it.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Why is the grass so short?
Yeah, so what we really have on one side of the bank here is essentially turf grass sort of going right up against the side of the creek. And as sort of mentioned earlier, it's really steep on one side, so there's a lot of erosion going on. This is not what a regular creek side might look like. We are sort of trained societally to think that we all should have a nice short little lawn. But we're seeing some erosion here. You can see some roots sticking out, signs that, soil has been falling into the creek. We have basically a lack of vegetation along this side of the creek, which is going to contribute to a lack of shade, right? So this creek might really heat up in the summertime when there's a lot of sun shining on it. Yeah. One thing, a couple other things that folks pointed out last time is the flow level is pretty low. It looks like this photo was taken in the fall based on the leaves on the ground, and that's when we do sometimes have less water in the creeks. There's also some invasive plants popping in right there. You see some Armenian blackberry. So this sort of erosion or downcutting of streams is something that's pretty common in urban areas, and we'll explore a little bit about what might exacerbate this erosion, which is concerning. Even if your house isn't right along the side of the creek, it's not the best situation for our creeks to be in. And it can definitely affect in-stream habitat if there's too much sediment. Again, that starts to, and I'm wanting to talk about fish and fish eggs being porous and needing clear air rather than sediment settling and suffocating them. But I'll save that for next week, right? So all of those little impacts are cumulative. When we have downcutting, basically our creek becomes a deeper and deeper trench when we have those big sharp sides to the creek. And that means that the water then doesn't really have as much space to spill out to. So when it rains really hard, we might see things like this. And for clarity, this is Johnson Creek. But what we have right here is the creek is it's disconnected from some potential floodplain space. This physical barrier is preventing that water from accessing the floodplain. And in urban areas, as we've tried to, modify our creeks to protect maybe the buildings that we've built very close to them or in the floodplain, we start to see this problem getting pretty exacerbated. So let's talk a little bit more about floodplain, right? Today's floodplain isn't necessarily tomorrow's floodplain. This setup right now looks okay, sort of a cross section, but presumably the water would most of the time be right there at the bottom. And the river can sort of use the floodplain when we get a lot of rain and it gets more full. It has access to more spaces for that water to just soak into the ground or be standing water for a little bit. The next slide is going to show, so in right here, you can see that this factory and the houses, they're protected from the floodplain, right? These arrows are indicating where the floodplain is and they're not in it. On the next slide, we'll basically show what happens when you fill a floodplain and develop it. So now that water doesn't have access to that floodplain space, which means that that water, when it does escape its banks, is going to go into places that weren't formerly part of the floodplain. And so we've increased the level of flooding, and now these houses and the factories are more liable to that flooding. So essentially, if you can prevent floodplain fill, you can keep existing development safe. And a lot of our infrastructure was built before we had a really strong understanding of where our floodplains were and the importance of letting our creeks reach those floodplains. And again, another component of this is talking about pervious and impervious surfaces. So usually when it rains in a forest, let's say, the water is going to reach a lot of absorbent or porous or pervious surfaces. And so that water will sort of slowly soak into the ground. Some of it's going to just catch on the tree leaves and evaporate straight off. But some's going to soak more into the ground. And what you see is that actually recharges our subsurface flow so that as that water slowly makes its way towards the creeks, it might not even get there until, say, summertime when the water is low and needs some recharge. And you don't have as much moving on the surface. Now, in urban areas where we've built a lot of impervious surfaces like pavements and parking lots and roofs and roads, right? It's the opposite, where we have a lot of water running on the surface and we don't have as much chance to really recharge our groundwater. And so in our urban areas, a lot of that surface runoff is going to go straight through our storm system and into our creeks. And so our urban creeks experience what's called flashiness. And so this graph basically shows the water level or stream discharge before, during, and after a rain event or over time. And so what we see is when it rains, the water slowly, this is an unurbanized, this is a forested stream. The water slowly infiltrates and eventually reaches that creek. But when we have urban areas where there's more of that surface runoff, it looks different. We have a sooner and greater spike in how much water is moving through our creeks. And so when we have storms in our urban areas, we have a lot of water that moves into the stream quickly. And that, it can be problematic because one of those things that it's doing is it's exacerbating that erosion. When we saw that steep side of the bank, the more water you have, that's going to increase the intensity of the stream and further scour the sides of those banks and so on. So what it looks like in action might be this. So this photo is from the Tryon Creek watershed. So this is an urban creek. It definitely has a similar flashy hydrology where the creek, right after it rains, it gets really, really high, really fast, and then goes back to normal. What we've lost here is the opportunity for that groundwater to recharge. And this photo is from flooding in Milwaukee back in December of 2015. Essentially, flooding is going to be exacerbated by urbanization that happens upstream. And another thing is that, associated with climate change, our weather patterns are giving us stronger storms. So it's a compounding set of circumstances for us to figure out how to manage our watersheds wisely. And it's not like it's all our fault necessarily. A lot of this infrastructure that we have was built before there was a really, clear understanding of flashiness that happens in urban areas. And so this is the McLaughlin corridor 99E. And so this 99 crosses all of the creeks in the North Clackamas watersheds. It's, as you can see, a lot of pavement and impervious surfaces. And it was built back in 1932 when FDR was president. So before we knew a lot about ecology and hydrology. So we're not only saying, because we know we'll need to build more buildings as more people move to the watersheds, we're not only focusing on how to build those buildings better, but we should also be thinking about what we can do to retrofit or improve the existing gray infrastructure that we have created. And we can take a look at some of the lessons learned from our neighbors to the north. So Johnson Creek has had a reputation for flooding for a very long time. And so during the Great Depression, as part of the Works Progress Administration Act, they worked to address flooding on Johnson Creek. So remember, first of all, this whole area used to be wetlands and floodplains and oak savanna habitat, right? So flooding was already an issue. So they lined the lower 14 miles of Johnson Creek with rock and straightened it out. And the goal was basically, by straightening out that creek, the water can move through and we don't have to worry about it as much. Any guesses? You can unmute yourself and say yes or no. Did this help flooding on Johnson Creek?
No, it made it worse.
You're right. Yep, it made it worse, unfortunately. So this was a well-intentioned but ultimately not very knowledgeable effort. Water moves through quickly, sure, but that just makes way for more water to take its place. And Johnson Creek, still has its reputation for flooding. And so, organizations working in the Johnson Creek watershed have done some big scale floodplain restoration projects that have helped to mitigate that issue. And so that's something that a lot of urban watersheds are looking to address better. So the temptation to channelize banks might be strong. Again, this is more of a natural stream bank. You see those turns and bends in the river, some natural woody debris in there, trees along the side to shade it. It's pretty complex. When we channelize our streams, we remove a lot of that in-stream habitat. We might remove, large woody debris that's inside the stream and so on and so forth. But basically, it might be better for you if you channelize the creek in your yard, but it's going to be worse for your neighbors downstream. And so we're hoping to sort of bring a watershed-wide lens to everyone's actions that happen here in the watershed. So now we're smarter. So what do? We work more with nature. So this is David Good, who basically Neil knows more about David Good than I do, but he was one of the first to sort of talk about rewilding London as a large city and better incorporating nature into our cities and designing with nature in mind. And on the left is Steve Berliner, who's the photographer for all of the great photos that you'll see. And so, because we know we've had some lessons learned and we have a better understanding of our watershed health, we want to basically work together and now that we're more informed, do some good things for our watersheds. So we're going to sort of talk about three main categories here. We're going to talk about things that individuals can do to promote better watershed health. Small things that have a big impact cumulatively. Some things that might be coordinated with the Watershed Council, where we work with, homeowners or property owners in the watersheds. And then we also have these more larger scale watershed level planning things that need to be more than just NICWIC and property owners. So these individual actions are scattered all over the watershed, even outside of it. These are things that might be little individually, but can definitely add up. So these small and cumulative actions, I really like this graphic because it's basically showing lots of different examples of what rain might pick up along its way to the creek. And all of these things we might contribute to as individuals, but we can't control exactly how much ends up reaching the creek, right? And so this is called non-point solution. It's not coming from like one pipe out of one factory that's processing something. So this non-point solution actually accounts for about 60% of our pollution that reaches our creeks. Things like motor oil, fertilizers, our detergents, and our pet waste, and so on. So how can we be, neighborly watershed residents? A couple of different things. Here's a really easy one. Just making sure that we're not contributing pollution directly into the drains. Preventing leaks and spills, cleaning stuff up, setting down cardboard to better absorb leaks. And then if you have a vehicle, there's a couple of different options, but when it's time to wash your car, a lot of folks might wash their car in the driveway. Kind of works like this, right? You could wash your car on your lawn, which will absorb some of the water, which is better. But still, the best thing that we can do as vehicle owners when it's time to clean our car is take it to a commercial car wash, because they'll actually reuse and filter the water, and it uses less water than it does than it would to wash your car at home. So we're talking 20 to 30 gallons as opposed to 40 to 100 gallons washing your car at home. Or you can let the rain do it for you. Another thing is there's no such thing as the poop fairy. So what comes out does go downstream, and we're talking about things, like bacteria and parasites that as they decompose, it's going to lead to algae blooms, which deplete our oxygen levels. And this is going to tie back into basically preventing your individual additions to runoff is one of the things that we can do that will lead also to better coordination for North Clackamas and other larger entities that might be responding to some of these spills. But bottom line, just don't dump anything down the drain. The less that goes in, the better. Another thing that folks can do at home is install a rain garden or disconnect the downspout from the side of your house or your building. A rain garden works sort of like a little bowl to hold on to some water for a little bit, and also can provide, some really great pollinator habitat for birds and other beneficial insects. And this allows our water to get filtered and slowed on its way downstream. So here we are looking again at another urban backyard creek. We're seeing primarily erosion and maybe flooding concerns are what we're looking at here. So you might know Noah at Johnson Creek Watershed Council. He is here. We are here to help you problem solve. There are usually two main actions that people do when erosion starts to become a concern. People will often either armor their banks or ideally work with maybe a watershed council to install some creekside vegetation. And so armoring our banks is really sort of a backyard scale version of the channelization of the bottom part of Johnson Creek. When we armor our banks or install riprap, it's not providing any space for that water to absorb. And so this is when we're talking about those problems sort of being exacerbated, it increases the speed of the creek, it increases the strength of the flow, which can cause more scouring and erosion downstream. The other option is to work with some plants. So willow stakes are a little like magic. You can just cut a branch, stick that branch in the ground, and it'll grow a whole new tree. So using live stakes is a pretty widely applied practice in restoration, because you can just stick those stakes directly into the bank, and as those root systems get established, they'll start to hold that bank together. And then eventually you'll also be providing more shade on the creek and more habitat and so on and so forth. And you might do some biodegradable matting like you can see here too. If you work with the Watershed Council, you won't even have to pay for the plants for those Streamside Stewards program participants. So riparian vegetation is what we would advocate for folks to do. And that way you can maybe invite more wildlife like this to your space. So a couple other things that individuals can do is to reduce using chemicals on our lawn as much as possible. Planting trees and native plants if you plant something that's invasive, it won't just stay on your property. It's going to spread around. Sweeping instead of hosing our driveways and sidewalks. Reporting spills. This was what I started to get a little on a tangent mentioning earlier. And basically when you report a spill, there's what the website might look like for you. And that gives folks an opportunity to respond and track down. So I know, for instance, in the past, Neil has received reports of someone saying, hey, it looks like there's soap in the creek. And then 2 more people call, and by sort of tracking people's reports, it makes it easier to start to isolate where that issue might be. And then come wintertime, de-icer is basically like sugar. So it's gonna degrade and suck up the oxygen in the creek. So sand and gravel are better options. You can also buy traction cleats and things like that. So now we want to talk about some of those problems that might be addressed by more than just one person. So the Watersheds Council is working along the creek side throughout the watersheds. And so we wanted to fill you in on some of the things that the Watershed Council does organizationally, working with you and with others. So when I mentioned Steve Berliner's photography, this is what I'm talking about. So what can we do together? So North Clackamas Watersheds Council is a non-regulatory authority. So there's no enforcement or anything like that as part of the work we do, no property ownership. But what we can do is work with others that do own property or that are in charge of these decision-making processes and standards that are set. So we have a Streamside Stewards program where we work right along the side of the creeks on people's property. We also advocate to remove Kellogg Dam and do things like this workshop, getting folks engaged in stewarding our watersheds. This is a before and after, or before and now photo of a Streamside Stewards site. By implementing this riparian restoration work, we're removing invasive plants, planting native plants, and that's going to add a better shade structure over the creek in the future, and also adds more complexity to the stream too. We have volunteer events that have kind of been on hiatus a little bit through COVID. Some of our partners have started hosting volunteer events now, again, with precautions. And so we'll talk a little bit at the end about how we'll stay in touch with all of you. This photo on the right is from the native Christmas tree toss that we coordinate with the Parks and Recreation District. So that's an opportunity to take people's native Christmas trees and put them into some off-channel habitat to provide more of that. Remember that underwater photo that we showed earlier, more of that in-stream habitat. So another, as you saw on that previous slide, another big work area is to remove Kellogg Dam, which is located right at the confluence with Kellogg Creek and the Willamette River. So the Kellogg Dam was built when Abraham Lincoln was a congressman. It was built to run a flour mill, and it is essentially obsolete at this point. It is a barrier to fish passage. It creates a warm lake impoundment behind it. And it's a really complicated project to work to remove, but Neil has been working really, really hard to get the wheels in motion to start to create a plan, because the vision for this habitat is basically, rather than having this I'm about this tall. If you can see where my mouse is wiggling, Neil and I were in the dam a few months ago, and it's very, very large. And so what we would want is for a more natural creek corridor so that fish can better access Kellogg Creek. There are a couple days a year where the flow is high enough on the fish ladder that fish can move upstream. And they do. We've found them. Neil, you'll know exactly where that one coho photo from later is from. But essentially this dam hasn't served a purpose in over 100 years. And so we work to remove that. This is, again, a video that I'll send out a link to, because we can't quite, the audio is just going to get a little funky if we try to play it, but. No. There we go. Okay. And then the Watershed Council is also working to move forward some science. Last summer, the rapid bioassessment report was completed with Interflu, and basically, Neil, you might want to talk a little bit more about the science that you guys are seeking to find, but there's some gaps in data that the Watersheds Council is hoping to fill. Things like what the temperature is year round on, I believe, Rainierson and Boardman Creeks. I'll move on because I don't see coming off of mute yet, Neil, because I know you can speak to that more later too. Oh,
Now,
here, go ahead.
give you a lightning quick explanation. So the bioassessment was like a quick report that basically was meant to assess, do a quick hit of walking most of the streams, basically saying what are the stream conditions like, where are the big opportunities for good projects, and basically what it came back with was saying the creeks need more wood in them, more complexity and more pools, and in a couple of places potential for side channels where they can reconnect with that floodplain, and especially for salmon and trout and lamprey, create rearing habitat. So we kind of left that with a list of immediate habitat projects that we want to do. One of them we're hoping to start construction on in summer of 2022, if all goes well, at the mouth of Boardman Creek. But it also, that was phase one, and I'm going to make this short, but we are about to plunge into developing our watershed action plan, which is basically going to be a 10-year restoration strategy that is really going to bring together lots more information, including information that we want to start collecting because it hasn't been done, to do things like monitor the temperature continuously so we know how it reacts to climate change, and we know where the coldest water is. And we can make sure we're doing projects to protect that cold water, identifying any barriers to fish passage that may have been missed, and figuring out exactly what the priority project should be to get fish up into the system. So basically, we're going to be working with a consulting firm starting actually about 2 o'clock today. We had the first call to identify basically bring together all the science across all of our watersheds, looking at everything from stormwater to fish habitat to wildlife habitat to water quality, and saying, where do we need to focus for the next 10 years?
Thanks, Neil. And John, your hand is up. Hi.
I just wanted to jump in real quick. For a lot of folks, this might be obvious, but other folks may not realize it. Temperature is probably our biggest pollutant. And people don't tend to think of it as a pollutant or as much of a problem, but the temperature in our streams is much, much warmer overall in most streams than it used to be. And so all the fish, especially the fish, but other creatures as well, but mostly fish, they evolved for a certain level of temperature. And you get beyond that, they can't live in it, they can't breathe, they can't populate. So it's one of those things where we're trying to do what we can to get that temperature back down, at least shave some of that off, some of that heat temp load off of there, so that they can survive in water that otherwise might be really good for them, but it's too hot for them to survive.
John, that's a really good point. One of the things that we talk about a lot with our restoration folks is, there was a really big warm pulse in 2015 where the Willamette hit like 80 degrees. And that's, for salmon, that's basically lethal. And what did the salmon do in the lower Willamette? They went up the tributaries. They went up Johnson Creek. They went up, Boardman Creek. They, at the time, probably couldn't get as far up Rainierson Creek as they can now. But because those creeks are, even though they're warm, they're cool. They're still cooler than the Willamette in the heat of summer, even in average years. So temperature is a critical factor. And again, we know climate change is going to change things a little bit. We know urbanization changes things a little bit. So we want to just start collecting a lot of temperature data. The technology is getting better and better by the minute. We just want to start doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, John, for that. I don't know if you intend your hand to still be raised or not, but if you don't, cool. That way, if you raise it again, I'll be able to notice. Yeah. So, stream temperature is directly correlated to how much oxygen the water can hold too. So colder water isn't just to keep the fish comfortable. It's a matter of how much oxygen that water can hold too. Great. So that segues really organically into the next section where we're talking more about things that that we have to do together, that no one entity has control over. And that's where, where Wes and Oak Lodge Water Services start to, really become our valuable partners in this work. So here's where we're working to figure out how to restore these natural processes and our natural watershed functions. So these things are going to affect the entirety of the watersheds. So things that only the government necessarily can do. And we have a bunch of them. We have 3 cities, 3 county departments, 3 special districts in the watersheds. And so this watershed level planning really starts to encompass the whole watershed health. So let's dive into this a little bit. So one example is the city of Milwaukee developed a comprehensive plan to basically prepare for climate change and increased housing needs. And now they're figuring out how to implement it. So there's a comprehensive plan implementation process that's going on. And they set a really awesome goal of having 40% canopy cover in the city by 2035. The city, has declared a state of climate emergency. And so right now there's this process going on to figure out how can we reach this goal at the same time as reaching, our housing needs and our equity needs and our parking needs and so on. And so I'll give you an action item related to this one a little bit later. But basically, we're trying to make sure that new development is watershed friendly, figure out how we can, undo and fix our old gray infrastructure that was built before our knowledge and rules and regulations were in place. And we're also working together, to study things too. And so this is a neat example just of a creek that's only really thought of for flooding versus one that's thought of with the whole ecosystem and whole community in mind. Government level planning can help to protect floodplains amidst development. And because in a lot of the watershed, we already have houses built throughout the watersheds, that makes that upstream protection, all the more important. And any, problem areas can be restored in order to protect, again, this whole upstream downstream system that we have with our watersheds. You can say you all live downstream, you all live upstream. So we are really connected throughout by what happens. So this is maybe one of the least watershed friendly parts of the North Clackamas watersheds, the Clackamas Town Center. It's just a lot of impervious surfaces. And so we sort of spoke to this already, but part of what we're doing is, upping our game with science and figuring out where to prioritize our work. I don't want to speak to this too much because Neil basically shared the bioassessment is giving some good direction for multi-level planning. But floodplain restoration projects are another really exciting thing that can happen. One thing, so basically this is just giving that creek access to some floodplain habitat that it might have been cut off from for a really long time. And these projects are really heavily engineered. It might not look like it just to walk through a project, but the more you learn that there's more to learn, right? That's how it is in all things with life. And for me, especially with floodplain management. And so I know that, Wes is working on 3 creeks and has worked on Oak Bluff. If you go up to Johnson Creek Watershed, you can see the Foster Floodplain Project. So these types of projects are big enough where typically we're working with a variety of government agencies and funders, and it has to sort of be all hands on deck. It has to be a group effort.
And I think this actually might be from the Foster Floodplain Project. Are people familiar with that? I know John probably intimately familiar with it.
This specific one is not from Foster Floodplain, but I highly recommend people going and visiting it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a story worth telling and looking at it as a model for something else. I'll be super quick about it because I'm not the expert. But Johnson Creek kept flooding and people kept getting flooded out. And it got I remember living near Johnson Creek in the flood of '96, and it was nuts. There was a huge amount of loss of property and damage. And basically what happened was they got really creative with how they used their FEMA money from the flood, and I don't pretend to know how to do that. And there are probably people on this call who know exactly what happened. But they basically created a whole new floodplain area where there had been houses that kept getting flooded, and gave it back to the river and gave the flood a place to go. And it also served as a park and a natural area, and it's really cool. And it's not until you know what it is when you're walking around there, you realize, oh yeah, that probably was where there was a house. I can kind of sort of see, you know, parts of it, but it's a really cool story, and it was really creative rather than saying, we're going to treat the symptoms over and over and over and over, that we can actually, let's actually kind of get to the, get to what needs to be done sooner rather than later, and let the river do its thing.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It's a really, really cool project. So they removed, I think, about 60 or 80 houses and then graded the whole site down about 6 feet. And it was a part where you could see if you see before and after photos, you can see where that channelized stream was. But then they rerouted the stream and gave it the sinuosity that you can see in this one. And no, they did not line that new stream with rock. They lined it with that biodegradable, that matting that you saw in the willow photo, so that you started to get some plants establishing along more of a natural bank. Really, really cool work. So these are the kinds of things that, you know, can be accomplished by governments and or nonprofits, but government is, you know, almost always a stakeholder or like, you know, key landowner participant, and support is really, really essential to these. Another thing that has to be done together is green infrastructure. Elements of green infrastructure can totally be applied on an individual property scale, like when we showed rain gardens, for instance. It's one of these things that happens, you know, better and more quickly when it's, you know, incentivized or required by the government to a certain degree. So we're looking at things like bioswales. So if you've been in a parking lot and you see these little cuts on the side of the curb, when I first saw those, I wondered, you know, why wouldn't the curb just go straight through? But that cut is really intentional to direct water into these planters, and these planters are still connected underground to our systems. What it's providing for is a chance for that water to slow down, to get filtered through the plants, so the water that is moving through is going to be cleaner because of that filtration. It's also just going to, again, move through more slowly, and there's going to be less of it that reaches the creek. Remember the side-by-side pervious and impervious surfaces? With urbanization, we have a lot of too much water moving really, really quickly and carrying pollutants, and bioswales help to directly mitigate each of those three things. We also have things like detention ponds, which help to just hold, you know, water and more slowly drain after a storm and provide that water a chance to infiltrate. Again, might only look like this, but underneath there can be some really intentional infrastructure that we have, and that we, you know, want to see more of this kind of stuff in our watersheds. Another infrastructure related thing is those gray infrastructure retrofits that we've been talking about. I know there's some a similar project in the works at Dave's Killer Bread right now. So again, this watershed level planning can sort of, you know, incentivize or provide, you know, programs that make it easier for folks to accomplish this sort of work. So we're going to go back to that tale of two buildings, but it's really a tale of a lot of two buildings. So we have, you know, impacts to individuals and to the watershed. And this is a really cool side-by-side photo of a comparison between traditional and low impact development. We know that housing is a growing problem, and these two options for this housing development still have the same number of units, but there are some really key differences. The traditional one on the left has, you know, really wide streets, big turnarounds, and so on. Not a lot of bioswale management going on. And then the low impact development, we see, you know, narrower streets, might be more pedestrian or kid friendly. One thing about having trees along the side of the streets is they actually slow traffic and reduce traffic incidents. You'll hear about that in our third workshop in a few weeks. But having really just some more intentionally created green spaces and natural resources so that stormwater can also be treated on site. And so how might these two options play out depending on which is employed? If we stick to so let's imagine a housing development in the upper watershed. So upstream of where a bunch of people live, as as they might have been designed in the past with minimal stormwater treatment standards. We're going to have more impervious surfaces, which is going to lead to more flooding downstream, which means you have lots and lots of neighbors, and some of them might not armor their bank, but a lot of them might in response to increased flooding. And that again is just going to exacerbate that problem and lead to more and more downstream flooding. So the status quo is sort of, easy and cheap for developers, but more neighbors are impacted and more problems are passed down lower and lower in the watershed. If we were to have some housing that's, looking at low impact development, where there's less impervious surfaces installed and there's more on-site treatment of that stormwater, we aren't going to have as much flooding downstream, which means we won't have as many neighbors rushing to respond to issues. We might have less of those creek banks being armored, and we'll have a healthier watershed and habitat. And so this photo is of a coho in Mount Scott Creek at Mount Talbert in 2018, which is what we want to see more of. So these things are, so of these two scenarios, right, which would we prefer? I don't want to speak for you, but probably the latter, right? Probably the one with more green infrastructure and more trees and stuff. And these are influenced by millions of different things. You can ask the questions like, are there incentives or programs for retrofitting parking lots or ordinances that protect our really old growth valuable trees that are super absorbers of carbon? Can we replace culverts that are barriers to our fish passage? Are there budgets for things like science and restoration? All of these kinds of things take a lot of collaboration to get done. And we can change these, basically, is where it's at. We as individuals are part of our community. And what we want to do is empower you to help make some of that stuff happen. So I mentioned the City of Milwaukee's comprehensive plan implementation. There's a whole online open house system that you can do and sort of like walk through different tables, quote unquote, and weigh in. So that's a pretty specific action item. But back to the movie tidbits in here. We wanted to basically round out with, we're going to open it up for a little bit more, discussion here. If you found out about this workshop through our newsletter or through our Facebook, that's great. And we'll, keep you on our newsletter list. If you're not on there yet, unless you tell us not to, we're hoping to add you to that. And that's basically how we can tell you what's going on and when there are other opportunities to speak up, volunteer, get engaged. Then we wanted to hear from you all what things were most resonant in this presentation. We listed a lot of those little individual things that we can do day to day and explain some of the ways that our voices can help, guide the objectives in these bigger planning processes. So we were thinking about just having folks pop it into the chat. What might be one thing you can do every day in your everyday life and one specific thing that you might want to weigh in and use your voice to speak towards watershed protections. Let you start to do that. I'll just end with a reminder that we have 2 more workshops coming up in the next 2 weeks and move through to questions. And I'm officially sharing the stage with Neil again now.
Thanks. So yeah, go ahead and type into the chat what you feel like you can do in your everyday, day-to-day world. I just watched my girlfriend bust out about 3 rain barrels last weekend. It took her longer to get the cinder blocks from Home Depot than it did to do the whole rest of the thing. They're pretty straightforward. But the yeah, and there's a couple of questions in the chat I want to get to. And that John, looks like John had to sign off. Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
All right.
In the past, we've had the chat really flopping in. The Johnson Creek Floodplain Project is at 205 and Foster, just where you exit 205 onto Foster. It's at like 110 in Foster.
There was also a question that was, there is, I think it's on our, a couple of folks, we'll email everybody a PDF of the watershed map. It's on our website as well, but we'll just email it to you. Lydia also asked, how is pet waste different from wildlife? And obviously wildlife poops too. But the main difference is wildlife tends to poop in lots of different, little amounts in lots of different places. We don't have like the big, everybody walks their dog at the same park and there's a dog park, and the amount of waste that comes off of that tends to be concentrated. And that is the biggest difference. Coyotes are just always constantly on the move. They're not all frolicking together in a place that gets really muddy and all that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Find your water.
Other questions, others, what steps can people commit to in their daily life, and what steps can people commit to in their kind of engagement with how these decisions get made? You know, one thing we put up there is that open house survey, digital open house survey for the Milwaukee tree plant or the Milwaukee comp plan implementation piece, that's open till April 8th. They just want feedback because they can't do a big open house because of COVID. So you can just go to their website, and I've done it. It takes about 5 minutes to basically say, gee, you know, like, what do you think the rules should be about trees and parking? It's about parking, trees, and housing. And they want people's opinion. That's one thing we could all fill out, and I'd love it if you did.
And we can do a follow-up. Any questions or curiosities?
No, I think this was great. You guys did a really good job. I felt like this was like a course that I wanted to take, and your visuals matched perfect, and they're relevant, and I can visualize like where they are. That was really great. Thank you so much, you guys. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, here's what I kind of love for folks to do, because we can't do it during COVID. I'm going to ask you to do, especially as the weather gets better. Find a cool public place in your watershed you didn't know existed and go walk around there. A lot of people have never, you know, like we find that all the time just because I think everyone has the places that they know about, like Elk Rock Island's obviously really popular. There's a lot of other places. This is the perfect time of year to do that, obviously. We'll get into that a little more in the future workshops when we get into wildlife. Get out there, check things out. But I do really ask that you make a specific commitment to doing something in your daily life that helps watersheds, and something that is a little more public facing in terms of you know, being able to participating in these processes where decisions get made. I'll tell you a secret, which is not really a secret. The folks, when the city of Milwaukee City Council has a meeting to approve a policy and I show up, they know what I think already. They're either going to agree with me or they're going to disagree with me. And to be honest, the Milwaukee City Council was great. But when I show up and then 5 other people also write in email comments or show up or something like that, it has a lot more impact. There is power in numbers when these decisions are getting made, and you don't have to be an expert. All right.
Oh, Dick, you're on mute. In the lower left corner, there should be a little microphone icon. It'll be the video one that you found earlier.
There,
There you go.
that's-
All right.
I said, thanks, Neil. Good show.
Thank you. Yeah.
And it was nice to see all my support group behind me too. That was great. Nice to see you, David and John and Sue, of course. Thank you much.
Thanks so much. Judy, great question. I can just add your email because you asked. The RSVP form would be great, but I will just take your email address. Did I don't actually, oh, I do have it. Yeah, I'll just add you to the next two, Judy. So I've got you signed up.
You're always welcome. It just helps us remind everybody that it's going on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to click off. Thank you very much, everybody.
Say hi to Sally. Yeah.
Will do.
And Sue, you and I were in chat. If you have questions that you wanted to hang on for, you can ask us now too. Oh, I see. You just popped up on chat. Never mind.
Hi, Dick.
Bye.
I'll see you next week.
Okay.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.
So, okay, I'm going to throw it out now.
Yeah,
then.
I was just trying to read your chat to see if I could respond while we were still on the video altogether.
Yeah, I know. This might be more useful than me trying to show Neil on my silly laptop that kept collapsing last year. So Neil, I'm back in school again. So guess what projects I've picked again?
Oh, what is it? I can't wait.
Well, I actually ran the numbers again on the American Community Survey information.
Oh, okay.
But I still think, yeah, for everybody else, this is going to be really boring. Sorry. But it's basically it's taking the census information and trying to extrapolate information on who actually demographically lives in the different watersheds.
Awesome, actually.
The problem with it is that, I mean, spatially I can do it, but the census tracts, unfortunately and inevitably, do not line up with the watersheds. And I say watersheds because I split them all out. I actually ran the watershed models again to get a more accurate map than we got from what was her name? Molly?
I think I want to say Victoria, but
oh yeah, Victoria. Sorry. And so anyway, so I ran those again, and then one of my classes was working on interactive maps, and I got the interactive map to work so you could literally have a page with the watersheds on it, and just click on the map and it would lead you to your specific watershed within North Clackamas. I mean, I'm not going to do like the state of Oregon or anything.
yeah.
And you'll see that up above, I did include the what is that? EPA put out a web page that's also like, where's your watershed?
Yeah. Now it looks like I redirect somewhere else.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's the one above the WordPress. Sorry, somebody's mic is grating against something.
Yeah, it might be mine. I'll mute myself.
Yeah, it's the EPA widget. Yeah, it takes you to, God love the EPA. They build the strangest websites. This one basically it's a tiny box at the top. You put in your zip code and it tells you what watershed you're in. But so I'm trying to figure out a way. Currently, that interactive page, I would like to join it with, well, of course, with your permission, and if we can get it to work, to the WordPress page. But so far, the I wrote it in base code of HTML and CSS and so on, and it is not playing nicely with WordPress. So I have to go in and figure out why that is.
Yeah,
Um,
I struggle with anything more than the most basic web capability stuff.
Yeah. But if I can get it, it would just be like, it would be the equivalent of, well, you would unpackage it, but it'd probably be as simple as unloading like a JPEG into your website. It's just I have to figure out exactly where to push it into the website. And, I have access to all that. I just don't have a lot of time. That's my biggest take right now. And I'm sorry for going dark on you for a year for COVID, but
Oh no, that is totally understandable, and it's been a nutty world for me too. So
yeah. Well, my mom passed away, so that added a whole layer of insanity to the
No, that's big. Yeah.
yeah. So so that's all going there, but I would love to, I'm trying to build up a capstone project. This quarter is my last quarter at PCC, so I'm trying to build your project out to as big as I possibly can. And Alexis and Neil, I'm not sure if either of you ever saw the main project that was done on Johnson Creek. It was a giant map that somebody did for their capstone GIS, sorry, project.
A story map or an interactive map?
No, they didn't do either. They just did a flat map for Johnson Creek, but it was very detailed. I'll see if I can get I won't be able to do the same thing they did because their analysis was all on water temperature. And without that data, I can't really, do something comparable.
Are you working with Christina Friedel?
Yeah, I'm a student at PCC.
Okay. Yeah. I worked with a student last spring to put an interactive map on Tryon's website.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it has that doesn't necessarily solve the HTML based issues that you're talking about.
So, I'm sorry, Alexis, I should back up. So I've been working with Neil. So let's take away a full year. And before that, I did a class on interactive maps, and so I did it on interactive maps using North Clackamas. And before that, I did an interactive map on tree canopy coverage and vacant lots adjacent to North Clackamas Watershed creeks.
Cool.
I think I've gotten all the words in there. Anyway, so it's basically I'm just trying to build on that. Now, again, eventually I would love to be able to give you guys something that you could use. So this summer I'm actually, and this is after I turn in my capstone, I'd like to get I would like to get you more information so that, like, let's say you get an intern, that you would be able to hand them like, oh, here's the shape files and this is what we're trying to do, especially once you get your temperature. Like if you can get a citizen, what's that called, citizen science group together.
Yeah. I mean, the temperature stuff we want to actually do professional.
You have money for it?
A graduate student project with master students at Portland State, but some of it's probably going to be done by Todd, just because we want it to be
consistent,
and students, obviously when they graduate, they go and do something else, so and we want to be, because we want to track change over time.
Yeah.
What we want to do is make sure it's done consistently year to year to year to year.
Right.
So probably a little less, and really what it is it's interpreting the data, because buy a bunch of temperature loggers, you put them in the creek, and you go collect them months later at the end of the summer, and then you download the data and figure out what it means. And that's the part that's going to be the most important. Then you go back and put them in the same place. You know?
Right.
So I don't know if that may not be, some of the follow-up might be a good citizen science project where we're like, okay, now we know that this tributary of Mount Scott Creek is bringing in cold water. Now we want to find out why it's cold. You know, are there springs? Are there seeps? Do we need people to walk different stretches of the creek with a probe on their back and, you know, and really find out where the cold water is? That could be a little bit more intensive and a little bit more kind of
Yeah.
small groups of citizens.
Well,
yeah.
so yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be that, but just something useful to you guys, whatever I can do that's useful to you, in a format that you can actually access. So right now we're still, you know, ArcGIS Pro is still $4,300 a year, which I suspect is out of your budget range, but there should be a way to move it onto QGIS, which is a free, it's sort of like Google Sheets, it's free, but it is not something I've worked very much in, so it's going to take a